I'll spoil the fun early on and tell you that the logic does not agree with the claim that Paul met a brother of Jesus named James. This is how the Bible passage of Galatians 1:19 has been interpreted by most scholars. As we discussed in the previous video, Galatians 1:19 is the hugely debated point by historicists and mythicists. Most scholars who are historicists conclude that James, brother of the Lord, mentioned in that quote is the same James apostle mentioned in Galatians 2:9. The church has also historically run with this interpretation, and we now have this character called James the Just, a saint. Accordingly, he is said to be the person also named in Mark 6:3, and also the person mentioned by Josephus to have been martyred by stoning in Jerusalem. Hello and welcome to Faith in Logic. I'm Tanna Oka. I hold a degree in philosophy and I attempt to explore historical topics using a purely logical analysis. The logic challenges this point strongly, both looking at what Paul wrote, but even more so at what Josephus wrote. But we'll save Josephus for a separate video. A logical analysis of the biblical text suggests that this is a different James in Galatians 1:19, and that the term brother of the Lord may not have referred to a biological brother or a family relation. Now, using the argument of mythicists as a foundation, I will show three things. One, that James Ball, short for brother of the Lord, is not the same as James Apostle. Two, that James Ball, even if not James Apostle, is not also an apostle. And three, that brother of the Lord is not a biological term, but a role, title, or position in the early church. This is how I'll argue for the first. This appears to be the easiest argument. To recap, Paul writes in Galatians 1:19, "Of the other apostles, I met none except James, brother of the Lord." First, Paul mentions James about 4 times in all. On 3 occasions, he did not qualify him directly. We only know James is an apostle from Paul's description of his role or those associated with him. So why does Paul now qualify James as brother of the Lord for no apparent reason, unless he's talking about a different James? Secondly, it would make no sense for Paul to write so dismissively of having met James that he calls a leader or pillar of the church in Galatians 2:9. In Galatians 1, Paul had gone to Jerusalem 3 years after his conversion to validate his authority from the apostles. He spent 15 days with Peter, and he makes much of this. If Paul had also met James the apostle, he would certainly have talked about it. Or if for some reason he saw James but could not speak with James, he would have also made this clear. The way that sentence reads, it is not clear what James added to Paul's visit. This would be ultra bizarre for Paul, who clearly was at pains in various passages to show he also had authority and that he was also an apostle. The argument for the second also answers the first question. This sentence appears a strange way for Paul to say he met 2 apostles, even in English, unless Paul was trying to make a point, which is not evident. It is clear we are looking at a translation issue. In fact, according to Richard Carrier, the New International Version of the King James Bible, after expert committee reviews on the original Greek, translates this quote as, "I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother." This is clearly different in meaning and excludes James Ball from being an apostle. As Richard Carrier shows, another scholar, Trodinger, in 1975, studying the original Greek, comments that Paul used a complex form of the Greek in writing that sentence when he could have used much simpler sentences to say he saw 2 apostles. Also, if Paul meant to say he saw another apostle, James Ball, but did not consult with him, as he should with an apostle, he would also have made that clear. Because as the sentence stands, James Ball adds nothing to it. Trodinger asserts that it is more probable that Paul used that complex sentence for a different purpose, to exclude James Ball from being an apostle. Thus, Paul would be saying that he saw no other apostle, but he saw another Christian, James Ball. If this was what Paul meant, then the sentence makes more sense. Paul does not need to consult with James Ball or talk about their meeting. Furthermore, it appears Ball is a specific group and part of a hierarchy, as Paul points to them again as an exemplar group in 1 Corinthians 9:5. Paul says, "Have we no right to take a Christian wife like the rest of the apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Peter?" Here, Paul separates balls from apostles, which lends credence to the claim that James mentioned in Galatians was indeed not an apostle. If Paul referred to the biological brothers or relations of Jesus, then none of them were apostles. Now, Paul shows a hierarchy in this 1 Corinthians 9:5 passage, showing apostles as at the top and BOLs next. We know apostles are higher than BOLs because Peter is an apostle, as already confirmed by Paul in other passages, and he's one of the big three. So the question is, are BOLs actual brothers or relations of Jesus, or a group within the church? To answer that question, we read from the top of that chapter to understand what Paul is driving at. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas? Or is it only I and Barnabas who lack the right to not work for a living? Paul is trying to justify here that he deserves to be basically put on the payroll of the church for his labors. He's qualified enough, he argues. And not just for himself, but even if he decided to take a wife, that his family should be provided for by the church. He shows that this right is accorded the apostles and the balls. Paul is saying he is also an apostle. Now, the question we have to ask is, did the balls earn this right just by being biological brothers or relations of Jesus? Or did they earn this right due to the position they had attained in the church from their works? If the former, why is Paul mentioning them as an example in a narrative where he's showing he has earned this right by his works? And if the latter is the case, then why would they be a group known only by their biological relation or connection to Jesus? When we look at this passage logically, therefore, we have to infer that Paul is associating himself by his work for the gospel to two other groups honored for their work for the gospel. Paul thinks he should be accorded the rights given to these other groups, the apostles and the balls, because he has worked the same way as they have for the gospel. It follows, therefore, that balls are likely to have been a title for a group in the early church rather than the biological brothers or relations of Jesus. If you have loved watching, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for new content. Thanks and bye.